Okay, we're live again. Hello, everyone. We are with our Migrant Women Reality Watch number 13. And we have with us our guest, Houzan Mahmoud, who is our old friend of the network and a colleague and a sister with whom we had the pleasure to collaborate in the past. We actually co-organized an event in the European Parliament that was dedicated to the rise of fundamentalism at the intersection with the rise of neoliberalism and its impact on minorities in Europe, and in our case specifically, the impact on migrant women. And Houzan is also, in her own right, is an activist, very long, with a long history of feminism activism, both in Europe and in Kurdistan. And she recently published a book, and we're going to talk about all of this, but I will pass the floor to Houzan. So please introduce yourself, more about your work, who you are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this opportunity, and good to see you virtually after a long time of being of social distancing, basically. At least it's good to be able to talk and to basically update each other about activities that each of us are doing in different corners of the world, but also to reconnect. And I had the pleasure, of course, working with you before. But you said almost everything about me, and I don't like talking about myself. So maybe we can just move on and talk about,
Maybe we can talk then about your book to start with this, that we've been following your publications. I know that, so the book is called The Stories of Kurdish Women, or Kurdish Women Stories. And I know that you published it already in Kurdish and in Kurdistan, and it was scheduled to be published in English, but now it's postponed. So tell us why you wanted to publish this book, who is in this book, whose stories you're telling, and what are you planning to do with it?
Yeah, well, as you said, the book is published already in Kurdish, and now we were waiting its publication in June in London, but also in Canada, the University of Alberta Press, they also try to publish it for the North American edition, and also Pluto Press originally agreed to publish our book. And it contains 25 stories written by Kurdish women themselves from the 4 parts of Kurdistan, including diaspora women, of course, because, as you know, a lot of Kurdish women live in exile, willingly or unwillingly, because of the long history of activism, political activism, and because of state violence, and also because of division of Kurdistan, and it's ruled by 4 colonizers, colonized. So we are colonized, basically. I really cannot look at it in a different context within, I think Kurdistan is under colonialism by 4 states, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, and Turkey. And there's always a lot of persecution, genocide, oppression, execution. So a lot of people have really to flee. And in addition to wars, this is why we have a lot of women in diaspora who are politically active. They're engaged in intellectualism, political mobilizations, and various other groups. So the book contains some stories by them as well. It's of 5 generations of women. We have women who's 70 years old, and we have the younger generations of 20 years of age. And it's interesting how their life changes over a generation, but yet there are, without even planning for it, you can always see there's a thread, throughout all these generations and connecting them, and that's war, displacement, exile, loss of loved ones, gender-based violence, resistance, resilience, hope, love, all of this. You can really read about all of this. We have stories of women artists as well, novelists, poets, artists, who also speak about their encounters with the world that they grew in, and also some of them in exile, and the questions that they face in host communities as well. So the book, for me, the main idea behind it, hopefully when it comes out, you can read it and then learn more from it. about the question of Kurdish women. Obviously, because of the displacement and division and almost 100 years of national liberation struggle, you really have, Kurdish women did not manage to kind of get as much education as possible to kind of theorize themselves and to work in the field of academia specifically, or to form a kind of women's liberation movement that is not interrupted. So you had scattered forms of activism in different eras and different centuries and times, or you had women organizations, part of political parties or individuals or writers, poets, and so on, but not really as a feminist movement as such to this moment, in my opinion, whereas there are many individual feminists like myself who are active doing many things and forming different platforms to gather these voices. I found it, when you read research about Kurdish women, they are either depicted as previous research, let's say, or the Orientalists or the travelers who traveled and, they observed different things about Kurdish women. But that was not enough. As a Kurdish woman, I could see that that is not enough. It's important. It was done. And at least it is something, a base where we can criticize or build from it, on it. And then I thought, the woman's voices is missing itself, their own story from their own, experiences and encounters with the world outside. So I thought I should just create a platform, a project where we can, give their full authority over what they want to say. It could be one particular moment in their life, or it could be their whole life, but in a few pages. So some of them wrote very short, some of them wrote much longer pieces about themselves, their struggle, their encounters with forced marriage, for example, child marriage. We have one story with FGM, with the world of writing, the world of poetry, Arabization, exile, displacement. Or we have two mothers who speak about the loss of their sons and husbands' executions during Saddam's regime. There are a lot of things like that you can tell, all these voices where it's collected in one book from exactly the women themselves. It can really tell you a lot. You can see historical moments that was not mentioned before, that we didn't know much about it, where it comes so clearly out in their talks and in their writing, basically. So I thought it is interesting and important, although it was difficult, to be honest with you, because of our division. Again, there are Kurdish women who cannot read and write in Kurdish. They write either in Turkish, Arabic, or Farsi. So we had to translate from all of those languages into Kurdish Sorani. It's a formal writing of Kurdish, and then to publish it in Sorani, in Kurdish, in my part of Kurdistan, South Kurdistan, or people refer to it as North Iraq or Iraqi Kurdistan for the sake of clarity. But also we had young girls in exile who could just write in English. So we, got their stories in English translated again into Kurdish. But then from Kurdish, we had to translate all these stories into English. So we had to be really careful in terms of making sure we kind of double check everything, and to make sure that their story and their words and their, is really kind of transmitted correctly, and the reader can understand it. So this is how it worked. It was a difficult, complicated, sensitive. At times I had to cry, really, because some of these stories are really powerful and really painful as well. But you can see so much resilience in these women, so much passion in what they believed in, what they were doing, so much hate against fascism and a dictatorship, and so much love for freedom and liberation, and also sacrifices that they made. But like, for example, when I launched my book in Kurdistan in November, some of the women, the older ones, they came and they were so lovely, and you could tell that they were full of pride. After all these years, they managed to tell their story, and they were so happy. And And that really, that moment when I saw these women, and they told their story again, but in full length as well. So there was a lot of people who came and they listened, and it was really interesting for me. It was so emotional, and I was almost in tears. And one of them gave me her, you know, clove necklace. We make it in Kurdistan, and they were like really happy. And I was so proud that these women were so amazing and so full of pride and so full of life and love. And so, you know, they just. I was lucky to get their stories really and to publish it in this book. And there was many others, of course, who shared their story, which is really amazing. I mean, for me, that was maybe one of the best projects ever. I really enjoyed doing it while it was painful, while it was, you know, but it was also joyful. It was also important and interesting to read all these stories, to read all these resilient and powerful Kurdish women's voices, to be collected and to be given to the outside world as well, so that it's not only and one of the main depictions, or two main depictions that there are out there about Kurdish women, they're either forever victims of male violence, or they're, you know, they have a gun and they keep on fighting all the time. You know, it's not really either or this type of two simplistic pictures about, or imaginations about Kurdish women, but they are varied. Their experiences is varied as well, because they live in different parts, or even in the society, the way they react to these things is different. So I thought these voices, these opinions, and these worldviews should be included. And yeah, and this is who we are. This is what we could be, really, you know. So it was very rewarding. Of course, it was done through Culture Project, our project, and with collaboration. It was a collaborated work with so many translators, editors, proofreaders, and people who collected these stories, because we couldn't travel to all these corners of the world to get these stories as well. So that was a really, really good, amazing teamwork, collective work, which I'm really proud of. I've known all these people and worked with them, of course. Yeah.
Well, this is really nice to hear how, the way you're describing it. That's also our experience. One thing is to work with policymaking and documents and reports, and the other thing is to work with women, and especially when you manage to document their stories that they felt that there was no space to express them. It is very rewarding. I can only imagine this. Okay, I have a lot of questions, but
okay.
You said you've done it through the Culture Project. So this is one thing that I also wanted to ask you about, because I think it's a very interesting and very important project, and especially in connecting different cultures and different regions, which is very important for our network, which is made of migrant women. But first, I wanted to ask you about Kurdistan. I do not know how many people actually understand the history. I mean, when we say Kurdistan, and then you say there are four parts, or four Kurdistans we can talk about, and you mentioned colonization, and we discussed it in the past as well, that there is specific interest in this region, and there are specific reasons for this interest to be there. And I know that you go to Kurdistan regularly, or at least when you can, and you do some activities there. So one was this publication of this book. Please tell us more about this history and also the work that you're doing there. Because, as you said, I think this is a very fair observation for me, who is not a Kurdish woman. Like what we see in the media, apart from the fact that, of course, migrant women are always kind of victims. But when they speak about Kurdish women, there is this either a woman who is dominated by patriarchal traditional community, or she's this warrior from Rojava with a gun who's going to save us all. Yeah. So what's the reality?
There is some elements of truth to both of it as well. As you know, violence against women is a global phenomenon. It's not particular to any community or any region of the world. It just changes. The name changes in the context of different societies. For example, in the Middle East, you have so-called honor killing. In Europe, you have a man killing his wife for reasons of so-called passion, crimes of passion. There's no passion in killing. It's all killing of women, and full stop. The whole, the question of Kurdistan, of course, and You know, for me, as a leftist person and as somebody who is by nature against all these imaginary nationalisms and nations and borders and flags that further divides people, and you always have ongoing genocides from one people to another, one country, one region, it's like that's unfortunately human history. And before, there was this region called Mesopotamia where people lived, and they weren't like countries divided along these new artificial new borders, basically. And every time one empire ruled, so the whole region will be ruled by that particular empire. And for the past, before Kurdistan was divided, it was under the Ottoman Empire. And when there was this whole alliances against Ottoman Empire, it was defeated. And then the region fell under the mandate of British and French and so many others. So they divided, they reshaped the map of Mesopotamia in the olden form. They reshaped it into the new Middle East. So really the Middle East is a creation, is an imaginary thing, project. I would say an imperialist project. And if people don't see it that way, it's their freedom, it's their choice. But ever since, there has been a lot of bloodshed, dictatorial regimes, even those countries where they had revolutionary momentums against so-called colonialism, but then they ended up with dictators for 40 years, 50 years, 30 years, really bloody dictators. And of course, Kurdistan, the Kurdish people were divided among 4 states, Syria, Iran, Turkey, and Iraq. And unfortunately, these governments have never been a civilized, modern, or as we call it, democracies. They were always suppressing most people. I mean, I hate the issue of minority majority. It's nonsense, you know. So they would oppress Kurdish people, deny them the right even to education, cultural rights, language rights, right to existence. For example, under Kemal Ataturk, when they were forming so-called new modern Turkey, they just wiped out entire Kurdish regions, and there were genocides, Dersim genocide, which is like a notorious one. Saddam's regime subjected us in my part to genocide. Assad's regime, Syrian regime, denied the existence of Kurdish rights, and like hundreds of and thousands of Kurdish people lived even without ID cards. So they were not even allowed to speak in Kurdish. In Iran, it's just a total assimilation. You know, everybody has to speak Persian, and that's the official state language. You know, so people manage to speak at home, or they teach themselves Kurdish at home. I know I have Kurdish friends from Iran. They teach Kurdish to their kids at home, so they are self-taught. That's how they keep the language going. I mean, every day they execute Kurdish activists under the name that these are infidels and these are against the war. And the latest was ISIS attacking Kurdistan, the Rojava part, saying that these are infidels and then they have to be killed and so on and so forth. So it's a never-ending story, basically, and it seems like we are cursed. So everybody wants to kill us because we are not Muslims, or we are against Islam, or we are infidels. But in fact, there are a lot of Kurdish people who consider themselves Muslims. So there's a crazy factor to that as well. It's interesting, although we are colonized, even our maybe being a Muslim because we were colonized previously as well. And the same way we fought in Rojava in the olden days, Kurdish people fought against Islamization as well. So that's why they can never imagine that Kurds are really truly Muslims. So there's always this excuse by any theocratic regime. It gives them a more legitimate reason to kill, to subject Kurdish people to genocide. Even Saddam called his campaign, or not campaign, it was a project of annihilation, Anfal, which means genocide, which happened, it's an Islamic term, basically. It's to subject people who are not Muslims to genocide. So because that's how their brain functions, of fascist local dictators. So yeah, so we had to really take up arms every now and then. It's not like we are in love with guns, men and women, unfortunately, but it's a must. You know, unfortunately, so many times you have to take up arms, you have to defend yourself. Imagine you live in a village, in a city, and suddenly hundreds and thousands of ISIS fighters, they come to you. Their only project is to basically kill you, to subject you to genocide and rape and violence and so on. So what would you do? You take up arms and you defend yourself as much as I can. So that story with the gun is really mainly that. But the story of Kurdish women up in arms in Rojava is slightly different, because they really, in my opinion, it's a feminist struggle as well, because ISIS came with a very misogynist, patriarchal slogan that to take the woman as a spoil of war, to sell them, to rape them, to basically kill them or whatever. So these women took up arms to defend themselves as women, but also to have the armed struggle with their brothers and fathers who had to really defend their cities. And it was brilliant to see that they managed to defeat ISIS, because ISIS didn't want to be killed by these women, because they have the dream to go to heaven and have 72 virgins waiting for them there. So, thanks to the Kurdish women not letting them have that dream and meet their 72 virgins in heaven. So it was a very, when these wonderful women were interviewed, they were so lovely and so powerful that they were saying, this is the ISIS, they come with that dream. But we will, even if we have one bullet, we will keep it for the time that, unfortunately, to kill themselves if they were, before they fall into the hands of ISIS. So it was a very, very important fight, in my opinion. It's very historical, and it's very important, what other options you have as a woman facing such a reactionary, such misogynist, patriarchal force, which ISIS represented the worst of patriarchy, really. So this is the case, and I'm really impressed by how they pulled that struggle, and they led many wars against ISIS, which was important. But as I said, the story of Kurds with a gun is not something that we like to see, and we want to contribute. Like my family, I'm like 47 years old now. My family were up in arms as well against Saddam's regime. That was not an option, I spent most of my childhood living with different families because to avoid being arrested, So this is how we lived. It's not an ideal life. Being resilient and resisting against fascist dictators means a lot of misery and problems and destabilization and breaking up of families and exile and displacement. So unfortunately, this is how it is. The core issue of and why we are so scattered around the world goes back to that problem as well. We are surrounded by monsters, basically, and we are ruled by monsters and dictatorships that really it's hard to find anymore in the world. But unfortunately, this is our reality.
And when you go back to Kurdistan, I remember I saw on social media, I think it was a few months ago, that you were organizing. Maybe it wasn't the frames of the publication of the book, or maybe it was something different, but I think there was a conference, and I remember there was an organization or group of young Kurdish women that you were working with. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, it was a conference, first of its kind, against sexual violence in Kurdistan. Yes. Yeah, a group of young girls called Sofia groups who are autonomous and independent. They organized it, and they pulled it really nicely. And Julie Bindel, Harriet Wistrich, and myself and some other feminists from abroad, we went back and we took part in that conference, which was really, really good. Victims, survivors, let's say, took part as well, but their voice was, of course, blurred so that people don't recognize them, and they spoke behind curtains and they told about their stories. And so there were many politicians were invited to listen and to see what's going on in society. So that group is really effectively working against violence against women, and particularly sexual violence and harassment as well.
And what about your culture project? What do you do there?
Our culture project is busy doing a lot of things. As you know, we have the English, it's a digital magazine format. We have the English section, but also the Kurdish one. The Kurdish one is extremely active. And we have a very high standard of publishing of, you know, texts online, poetry, short story, theoretical work, philosophical writings, you know, whatever, you know, in terms of cultural production in Kurdistan and also from a feminist and gender perspective. So yeah, we're pretty active on that, but also the book, the self-writing, like the Kurdish women's stories as well, that was our project for 2 years. So we managed to publish it in Kurdish. Now we are just hoping that the English one comes out in January and not postponed it again. And we are working on some other projects that I cannot tell you about it now, but when it's finished, I'll announce it, of course. And yeah, and we issued 9 volumes of Culture magazine, which is a print magazine of culture project in Kurdistan. Yeah, each magazine had an entire section about feminism and feminist writing by Kurdish women. So, you know, we've been really busy with those things. And also I was organizing a lot in London in terms of seminars, conferences. We organized that conference with you, and then a panel in Filia, remember, about secularism and women's issues. So we've been very active on secularization of Kurdish society as well. But unfortunately, because of this coronavirus, it's not easy to travel back, and it's not easy to organize things in person. So we will just wait and see. Otherwise, we had many seminars lined up really in London and in Kurdistan, but unfortunately, because of this situation, it all had to be postponed. Because I like virtual things, but I would prefer to kind of the proper organizing with a lot of people, and unfortunately, that's not doable at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, you mentioned the secularism, and I know obviously you're working on it a lot, and you got the prize for One Law for All, right?
Yes.
And that's a part of another prize that you got.
Yes.
But please, let's speak about that. What do you mean by secularism? Why do you think, I can understand obviously from perspective of now Russia, for example, where we have a real rise of Christian Orthodox fundamentalism, which basically merged at this point with institutional power. And yes, we know about some, you know, easily identifiable authoritarian regimes that will be totally and completely governed by the religious ideologies. That's not exactly the case in Europe, right? Or it shouldn't be the case. And why do you work on this issue still even in Europe?
Well, because as you know, as migrant women or women living in exile, for example, in the case of Kurdish women specifically speaking, fundamentalism is everywhere. Like you have Islamic fundamentalism across Europe, and you have many Islamic fundamentalist organizations actively trying to set up Sharia councils, actively trying to draw back communities into Sharia councils. And
what is a Sharia council?
These Sharia councils, it's mainly done by Indian and Pakistani Muslims and Bangladeshi Muslims and some Arab Muslims as well, up to now. And they are apparently counseling between couples or giving Islamic advice to men, women, parents, young, this, that. And it's mainly take its sources from Quran, from the religious texts and interpretation. And for example, it allows polygamy, divorce is the right of a man, and child marriage as well. I mean, there was a lot of it happening in the community, and I don't know if you were there. We hosted a joint seminar with South Black Sisters, One Law for All, and some other organizations. Culture Project as well organized it at the UK Parliament, and we invited a lot of policymakers and people to come and to listen to our organizations and why we oppose Sharia councils, why we oppose, you know, so much like religious schools, Islamic schools as well, whereby a lot of kids are abused and battered, and they are taught you know, different, you know, education things, curriculum at school. So we found all of that really detrimental to children growing up or born in Europe and growing up here, but receiving a totally different bringing up and different education and different religious. So they turned religion into an identity rather than a spiritual issue. So you have issues of radicalization. You have issues of all these people, young people from Europe joining ISIS, and all the problem that came out. I mean, that girl Shamima Begum is one of the you know, examples of brainwashing by Islamist organizations. So there was, it keeps these people vulnerable to brainwashing and drawing them into Islamic terrorism. And of course, unfortunately, parts of Kurdish community, especially the young people, I know friends, people who were totally secular and then having their children brainwashed by friends in school or mosque. Apparently they were going for praying, but ending up being radicalized. So we thought that there should be a lot more surveillance, and they should not be given so much right to really advocate openly for Islamism and Islamization of communities in the UK and Europe, for that matter. So we've been working on that issue for a long time, because there were a lot of women trapped in relationships because their marriage was done through these Sharia councils, and UK courts do not recognize these Sharia councils as a form of law. And then when the woman wants to divorce, because there are no marriage papers from the registration office, so this woman get trapped in this so-called marriage because the UK government's courts do not recognize the Sharia councils as a legal form. And then so you have a woman in dilemma and almost stuck in abusive relationships and full of violence. I think Southall Black Sisters issued a very important testimonies from these women who were victims of this type of Sharia councils. And yeah, so we try to, both in Kurdistan and abroad, we are trying to fight against fundamentalisms. Even in Kurdistan, unfortunately, you have a lot of fundamentalist groups who are calling for medieval type of, you know, relations, gender relations and norms. This is why it's important to have a secular society and secular debates, really, to separate religion from the laws and from the state as well. People are free to choose whatever religion they want to, but then that shouldn't be part of the laws and part of the education and part of the state apparatus. It's just too much, you know. And in Kurdistan, we have hundreds and hundreds of clerics funded by the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and all they do is preach against women in the mosques. And these mosques are full of ordinary men going for Friday prayers, and they end up listening to all these clerics, mullahs, preaching against women, preaching hatred against women, violence against children, so-called discipline your daughter, discipline your this. So it is widespread. That's why we have to campaign for secularism. It's not an ideal world, but at least secularism will protect the society from this type of preaching and this type of, you know, fundamentalism, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how do we position this? So we are aware of the rise of fundamentalism, and we're also aware, of course, that it is not an issue that affects only Islam or Muslim community, but it's happening in Hinduism. We have the same happening in Russia, in Catholic Church, in Orthodox Church. It's a global thing. This is what we know. We also know that, so depending on which country you go, so you go to, I don't know, Croatia or Czech Republic, and it turns upside down. So you have the community that is fundamentalist around the issues of Christianity, and they're directing the exclusion towards the Muslim people, and then you go to Muslim majority countries, and it's the other way around.
Yeah.
What are your explanations? We touched on this in our conference. It's been a while, but just I wanted to revisit why it is on the rise and what it has to do with the neoliberalism that is also on the rise, or like everywhere actually?
Exactly. Well, I think when we talked about it in our conference as well, joint conference, and in many other conferences and seminars in London and elsewhere, there's one thing in common in all religions, and that's the hatred towards women, controlling them, their sexuality, marriage, divorce. Everything is almost planned in a way that it's in the service of men, and it's all religions are advocated for by men, and so it's in their service and in their interest. And the reason why we have so much rise of Islamic or religious, generally speaking, religious fundamentalism around the world, we also have rise of nationalisms as well around the world, and misogyny and racism and fascisms as well. So it's all hand in hand, really. It goes in parallel. When in the past, when we had leftist movements much stronger, you know, really, you didn't have so much question or problems of religious.
I'm afraid I haven't lived in that period.
Yeah.
What I see right now is quite disappointing, what I see from the left movement.
Exactly. But for example, in Kurdistan, from my own family experience, they were all leftist, in a leftist group. And when the left was stronger in Kurdistan, these religious groups were their influence was very minimal. You wouldn't hear a mullah preaching against women in the mosque. You know, they were scared of so much. Secularism was more of a social thing. People respected those boundaries, and it was like really bad for a mullah to preach against women and children and so on. But nowadays, because unfortunately the left retreated, and then you have more of corporatization and privatization and neoliberal, you know, elements even in Kurdish society, because of oil industry and because of lots of other multinational companies playing there. So you have, and it's almost another industry. Islam is another industry, because you have tons of mosques opened up across Kurdistan, hundreds and thousands of mosques. Every Friday there's a prayer. Every Friday there are mullahs who preach violence, who preach hatred against women. And then they have an entire ministry of religious affair. They are funded. They have the best locations for their mosques, very strategic places. And unfortunately, you can see there's a retreat of the society towards backwardness. And I can see that even, and when I was in London, like 24 years ago, it is different from now. It was, okay, there were Islamic groups and mosques, but the level of radicalization was not as bad as recently. But recently it's just more out, and they feel like they're empowered, they have more space, they even preach violence so widely, which is really scary. And I think it's really, really bad. And it's seen everywhere, in most countries around the world, as you say, in Russia as well. And we've seen in other places. And we have a neoliberal kind of economy, neoliberal way of life, kind of whatever makes someone or some group more powerful and more influential. You have privatization of every sphere of life, basically. And in these situations, you have groups with more power and more financial resources who can dominate the discourse and the sphere as well of thinking, in my opinion.
And what is the feminist solution to this?
I think this needs a global resistance, really, and it cannot only be done by women. Like, it should be a multiple, we should work at multiple levels with various movements, the workers' associations or unions and groups, and the feminist organizations, youth organizations, civil society organizations, those who believe in values of living together, coexisting together peacefully. I think we need that unified worldwide answer to this, really. And we need more leftist ideals, to be honest with you. I mean, neoliberalism is taking over everything. You know, you have people who doesn't care even if they work in an Islamic government, like for example, so-called Islamic feminists calling for more women in an Islamic parliament. You know, what does that mean to the majority of Muslim women who are crushed in the machinery and the apparatus of Islamic regime in Iran? So you have that type of ideas as well, where it doesn't really take the women's movement anywhere. That's why I think we need more leftist ideal, more radical, more progressive, more revolutionary, rather than reformist type of one thing here, another there. I think small scattered responses, it's good, but it doesn't take us anywhere.
But what would be a revolutionary idea for a feminism?
It's like to really push religion aside when we talk about women's rights. You cannot find answers for women's liberations within any religion. Unfortunately, a big part of the women's, if we call it a movement, which I have my own doubts and problems about that everywhere, because again, neoliberalism divided women's groups. You get more funding if you are more neoliberal, and if you have more of a corporate-like, associations and organizations. And so this is why you have a kind of divided NGOization of the women's movement, which I think makes it more difficult even to agree on a particular issue like that. I have been to many conferences around the world where when I say I don't accept Islamic feminism or any religious so-called feminism as a form of liberation for women, they get shocked. No, but there are women who would like, okay, I don't care. But when you really talk about women's rights, you cannot find answers in Islamic or any other religious so-called solutions for women's rights. Tell me where, how can you, for example, convince an Islamic regime that 4 wives is bad? How can you change that? How can you say 2 witnesses in court are not equal to men? We have to fight against that, You can't just say, because they will not accept it. That's the thing. No Islamic government will accept anything that is non-Islamic. And you cannot really argue within Islam about women's rights. It's impossible. I find no answers in there. And it's the same with other women's organizations around the world. I think the question of religion should be treated as a personal matter rather than as a form of resilience or as a form of resistance for women. I just think it's really dysfunctional.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I'm not a Muslim person, and I don't, that's not my source of reference, let's say, but comparing, let's say, with what is happening in Russia or generally within the Christian so-called community, even though I think it's extremely difficult. I would never refer to myself as a Christian woman or a Christian Orthodox woman. But it's pretty clear for me that that's not the place where I would go to look for an answer, even though, of course, I recognize our individual rights to exercise the religion.
Yeah. The problem with some Western feminists, they don't accept that for themselves. They don't identify themselves with Christian, Muslim, Catholic, Christian feminists, Catholic feminists, and this and that. But they just also lecture you that, but women from the Muslim world can argue within Islamic context or Islamic framework for their rights. So they themselves don't believe in arguing for their own rights within Christianity or Catholicism and so on and so forth. But because they are cultural relativists, so they see it as your culture to argue your rights within Islam, which is not. Islam is not. My culture is not the culture of so many millions of women, but it's they don't want to see it as a fundamentalist theocratic regime, really, rather than as a people's culture. So when you fight for your right, when you talk about rights, when you talk about human rights, children's rights, this has to override nationality, age, gender, religion, background whatsoever. And this has been our argument even in Europe when it comes to the Sharia councils and other forms of Islamic organizations who are trying to take away a childhood or the teenagehood from lots of people who were born in these countries because they are from, for example, let's say from Morocco, Iraq, or Iran, or Kurdistan. They are just by default, they are all Muslims. That's not how it works, in my opinion. You could be born anywhere, but that doesn't mean you would identify yourself as a Muslim, as a Christian, or as a Catholic. But unfortunately, so many people in the West, as soon as they see the color of your hair or where you are from, they automatically decide that you are a Muslim. And that's really bad because so many people don't want to be identified as such or recognized as such.
Mm. Yeah, and this is something common that we have with the women, the members in our network, I think, and it has two sides to the problem. So either you're placed in a box immediately that you're a Muslim, but also after this, what happens is that there are a whole bunch of assumptions. So either you're have to be an obedient woman and you're always a victim and you're always victimized and by your community, or it's the other way, or you're the woman who is very religious. So just really a lot of expectations that when not necessarily true when you communicate with the real women and build a relationship with them. Well, okay, it's been almost 1 hour. Houzan, what else do you wanna say? I don't know about your future projects. I know that some things you cannot tell us, but maybe there is something that you want us to know. This video will stay on our timeline. We'll go into our collection of interviews. If there are any links that you want to share, we already included a culture project. It's in the description. Yeah. If there is anything else, messages.
Well, it will be great if people who wanted to find out more about Culture Project or to follow our future activities, they can just either follow the Facebook page or the web page itself. And then it has been a pleasure talking with you and working with you before. I hope this Corona is over and I hope everybody stays safe. And then hopefully in the near future, we can resume working and our activities where I'm really looking forward. There are a lot of things that could be done and we cannot really stop because even with this coronavirus as well, the level of violence against women and the domestication of, further domestication of human beings might lead, it has already led to a lot more violence against women and children, and we need to find more solutions and strategies as well, even while we are home, how to reach out to each other and to support women who are in a situation that they really require immediate help and support. And that is maybe another thing that we need to think about and to strategize around it as well, and be more creative about doing things like these. Seminars are very important, and at least it's a platform or it's a way that we can get connected and being up to date with like-minded organizations. And it was an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, and thank you very much for the opportunity, Anna.
Thank you, Houzan, and we wish you good luck and everything, and we'll speak soon.
Same.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.